Hi, I am Paul Sandberg, and I'm the president of the National Academy of Inventors. And I wanted to be on here to introduce this webinar because I just thought that this was very important. And I think that we've got a real opportunity here to really learn about a university that is dear to my heart, Johns Hopkins, where I did some training and also have stayed in contact for many years, and and watching their incredible growth in the past dozen years, uh, especially when really Christy Wyskiel came on board. So I wanted to introduce her. I actually met her at Johns Hopkins Children's Hospital here in Tampa 12 years ago when she started, when she was with Ron Daniels, the president there, and they came down to visit. And I was impressed then. And 12 years later, when you hear about what she has really guided and what her team has done, and the faculty, staff, and students at Johns Hopkins have really been motivated in various directions, I think you'll be happily surprised. So I would like now to introduce Christy. I'm going to stay back. And Christy, it's all yours. And thank you so much from the National Academy of Inventors for doing this webinar. We appreciate it.
Well, Paul, it is my absolute pleasure. This is a real treat. As you said, I met you in the very first years of the journey of building this incredible team and this enterprise and serving our faculty and students. And I'm hoping that there's something here, so a takeaway. There were many folks that help us build this along the way. You among them, Paul, played an important role. And so I'm hoping that there might be something here for others that are building and for doing. So the format here, I'm going to take about 20 minutes. I've been asked to share some of our progress, some of the things that we've done over the course of 20 minutes. And then we're going to have a Q&A. And those of you that are logging in, you saw that there was a prompt question. So feel free to ask that while we're going through this. So I just want to start, first of all, with a story about impact. And I don't know how many of you are familiar. Often when I give this talk to faculty, I say, okay, who knows what this is, and tell us about it. So this is a dialysis machine. And dialysis, as some of you may know, was invented here at Johns Hopkins in 1913. And it actually was not commercialized. It was not made available to patients as a product until the mid-1950s. And the group who commercialized it had nothing to do with Johns Hopkins. And in the intervening period between 1913 and the time it was commercialized, there were millions of deaths. And as you probably know, you can't live long in end-stage renal disease without dialysis. And we really talk about the importance of not only the discovery, but seeing the discovery all the way to the finish line and making sure that there's a product at the end of the day. And that is what we were all about. And when we were initially asked to take on this work, there was a committee here at Johns Hopkins of students and faculty. And by the way, this report, for those of you that are interested, is available on our website. If you just type in Innovation Committee, Johns Hopkins 2014, you will pop up. It's about a 100-page PDF, and it has strategy and some tactical recommendations. But this was a product of a number of faculty and students who went around the country and looked at great practices, and then did some real customer discovery amongst ourselves to say to our faculty and students, what is needed? What are the barriers? What infrastructure do we need to build? And that is what we have been doing for the past decade plus. We recognized early on that in order to have a strong ecosystem for the types of innovations that come out of universities, you need some critical things such as space. In our case, 80% of the things invented here at Johns Hopkins require lab space of some sort. They're biotech, they're life sciences. And folks needed, our companies, our young companies needed affordable and flexible space. They don't want to sign a 10-year lease. They don't want to pay top rate. They just need flexible and affordable. So that was one thing we raised philanthropy to address. They also need connections to all different types of funding, from grant funding, translational funding, angel funding, to and through venture capital investments and corporate funding. And so we have a team that addresses that, and our companies have gone on to raise over $4 billion in the last decade. And then various types of support that we're going to talk about today, including mentorship, programming, student accelerators, etc. So just a little bit about me, for those of you that don't know me. I'm originally from Texas. I have a liberal arts degree, and I ended up getting an MBA in Manhattan. I worked in finance for a period of time, but I've been in Baltimore for a little over 25 years, and my initial job in Baltimore was in finance, but I was always a healthcare investor. So I worked in healthcare investment banking. I worked as a health investor, and I became consumed with this idea as a Baltimore resident that there should be a way for Johns Hopkins, that has incredible game-changing research, to help the broader local ecosystem in terms of jobs, companies. Are there things that that we as a university could do? And so I basically left my finance life behind in 2010, and I was helping from the outside. I wasn't an employee of Johns Hopkins at the time. I was helping a number of faculty who wanted to start companies. And I actually helped two that I helped to found from scratch. And ultimately that led me on a journey to really try to better understand the ecosystem, what infrastructure is needed, what barriers existed. And I was asked by the president of the university to come on nearly 12 years ago to help do this. And that's when we founded Johns Hopkins Tech Ventures. So I like to think I bring an entrepreneurial mindset. I still have, I still am able to speak in a finance language that venture folks can understand. And I hope that brings value as we go out and try to court those folks to come and work with our faculty. I think one of the most significant things that we did on campus was to set up a single front door. When you're inside the university, it's sometimes hard to remember that you have different, we have Johns Hopkins, for example, we have 9 schools, we have different offices, we have business offices and development offices and tech transfer offices. But often folks just want to come to Johns Hopkins. They don't necessarily know or understand that there's a different office that handles things at the engineering school versus the medical school versus School of Public Health. And so what we seek to do, and this is really both for our campus inventors and innovators and industry and investors, to try to be that single front door to point people where they can go. We loop in who is needed. We hand them off to who's needed, whether it's a person at a school or a business office. But folks know when they come to us, they will be concierged to the right place. And if they need something from us, we will help. If they need something from someone else, and it just takes away a lot of the confusion about where outside folks to go. So one thing here, and I want to give credit to Don Rose, who wrote Research to Revenue. There is a book that really talks about what happens inside universities in the continuum. And as we all know, great research gets done, game-changing, competitive research that results in discoveries, that sometimes results in intellectual property that can then be licensed. And what I say to our faculty all the time is, I actually don't care if we license it ultimately. I'm agnostic if it's licensed to an established company versus helping to start a company, because at the end of the day, it's about the product and the impact. So sometimes our journey takes us on that the fork to the top, which is startup, and sometimes it takes us to licensing to an existing company. But ultimately, what we're trying to do is bring that product all the way to the finish line to help the world. We have set up our outward-facing group here at Johns Hopkins Technology Ventures in 3 different ways. The first is corporate partnership. So think of that as sponsored research that basically helps bring products forward. So there might be a biotech company or a tech company interested in working with some of our researchers, ultimately hoping to license and develop a product. Our tech transfer office is straightforward. I'm sure many of you are quite familiar with this, and there are a number of things that we've implemented. I'll talk about that in a moment within tech transfer, and then there's a team called Fast Forward that works on everything from, think about the top of the funnel when the inventions come in. How can we better develop those, and then ultimately, how could we potentially create a company and help that company be wildly successful? Ultimately, again, it's all about products to the market. When we speak to our faculty and students here, we talk about different resources to leverage. These are 10 examples. that we can help with. So again, everything from sponsored research we process, I think at last count, over 5,000 MTAs and NDAs in our group. We have various forms of entrepreneurship training and support. In fact, today the team mentioned that we're having 40 mentors come in who are mentoring our various teams to galvanize and help the effort to help our innovators. And then we have physical space, as I mentioned, that we've built here in Baltimore. So on the tech transfer front, we have an exceptional team doing this work, number of strong individuals that just really understand how to do this, and I think more than anything are really committed to our faculty. One of the ways that we show this commitment, this level of commitment, is through metrics, and we hold ourselves accountable that if you report your invention to us, within 2 days, you will be contacted. Within 2 weeks, we will have a meeting with you to talk about what you have disclosed as your report of invention. And within 2 months, we will provide a decision. Are we going to go forward with a patent? Is there some other data that we need? Overall, we hold ourselves accountable, as you can see, at 99%. This has been very well received, and would encourage those of you perhaps struggling with tech transfer to think about metrics like this. Having this level of visibility, faculty are very happy about it. One other thing that we spent a lot of time on is our student innovation efforts. It was very clear that there were a lot of students, both undergraduate and graduate, interested in this type of programming and activity. Sometimes that is companies that are created based on IP out of a lab, and sometimes that's just a student that wants to start a company based on their interest. In fact, if you think back in history, 3 of the most valuable companies in the world today were started by students when they were students. So that, of course, is Facebook, Meta, Microsoft, and Google. And so, you know, there is a real opportunity. We have something here that we have renamed after one of our entrepreneurial students, named the Pava Marie Lapierre Center for Entrepreneurship, that it provides all sorts of acceleration for our students. One thing as an investor that I'm very proud of is that in the 140-year history of Johns Hopkins, prior to the creation of this dedicated activity, there were only 11 exits, only 11 startup exits of companies coming out of Johns Hopkins. And in this past decade or so, a little over a decade, we have had 45 exits. So there are significant real companies getting created, investors are making money, and ultimately these products are reaching market and having value. I just wanted to briefly describe, as I mentioned, the vast majority of the things that we work on are in fact in the life sciences. These are 3 examples of products that have changed the lives of many patients. The first is a drug for brain cancer. The average age of onset of this particular type of brain cancer is in the mid-30s. So by age 35, you're diagnosed, you're on average dying over 10 years. Before this once-a-day oral medication was approved last summer, the only treatment was radiation, so you're dying and losing your mind in the prime of life. It was a horrific diagnosis. Our understanding of the pathway that led to these types of gliomas, a pathway called IDH1, allowed us to ultimately license that idea to Agios, who developed this drug that is now sold by Servier. So real game-changing brain cancer therapy developed based on basic science that ultimately became a product that was approved last year. Pylarify is actually our largest royalty-bearing product. Pylarify is sold by a company in Boston called Lantheus. It is a diagnostic for prostate cancer. It has been described to us as viewing in Technicolor what used to be in black and white when trying to diagnose and treat patients with prostate cancer. The last is a drug for metastatic melanoma, a combination therapy that we licensed to Bristol Myers and received royalties, although that patent has now ended. But again, all 3 of these just important and life-saving, life-changing products. For those of you that know tech transfer well, this business is not for the faint of heart. There are big years, there are bigger years, there are years where you're building, and ultimately what you try to do is bring back revenue to the institution, to the labs, so that more great game-changing research can be done. When we started this business, our revenue was less than 20 million a year, our licensing revenue, and now we're above 60 million. Very proud of that. A couple of the big years had to do one in 2016 with a large sub-licensing payment. So don't give up those sub-licensing rights for those of you in tech transfer. And in 2019, we actually took on an infringer. And so we litigated against a company that we believed was not paying us royalties on something that we had invented, and ultimately settled a case related to that. But I would just encourage you, if you're going to spend money on patents, back up your faculty. I feel very strongly about that. We also have a business here. This is not all of corporate sponsored research at Johns Hopkins. This is only a small piece of it, but this is the revenue that our group helps to go out and hustle and generate. So we go to meetings, of course, like Bio and others, where we engage with corporate entities, primarily in biopharma, although some in tech, that want to work with our researchers and try to bring in that research dollars. And of course, in this moment in time, in this day and age in higher ed, it's more important than ever to identify alternate sources of revenue. One of the things that we really are trying to do here in Baltimore and at Johns Hopkins is make sure that people know about the work. We have an excellent team that helps us try to get the word out, and we had a really big moment. The upper right article was in Fast Company, and the bottom was in Inc. magazine, and they basically talked about the fact that we are becoming a vibrant hub, and it is a place to do good work. These things take decades to build. Those of you in geographies where you're looking at what happens in Boston and Northern California and saying, how could that ever be us? Remember, those geographies have a 40 or 50-year head start, and so don't give up. There's always a way to add to the ecosystem, and that part of it is messaging and making sure to get the word out. One of the other things we track are the total venture dollars and the number of companies that stay locally. And prior to a dedicated creation and a focus on calling on the venture community, our companies had raised over the prior decade a little under 800 million. And as I've already mentioned, in the last decade, that number is over 4 billion. That is venture dollars coming into Hopkins companies. And so we also like to see that more and more of those companies are choosing to stay here. There are reasons for that. We now have flexible and affordable lab space, as I mentioned. We now have connections to local and national investors. We really invest in folks and make the case that it's great to be able to walk down the street to the lab of these preeminent researchers and talk to them about whatever the next experiment could be that could really help the company. So what is the secret sauce? How did we do this? I think if I had to frame it, it's highly intentional. None of this happened serendipitously. One had to lay out a strategy, get the resources to do it, be able to raise the money internally and externally to do this. But ultimately, we were able to build relationships with those who fund things, whether that's donors, whether that's venture capital, different types of mechanisms, making sure we had those in place. The second I mentioned, having physical space, was important for the types of companies that we help to create. And the third is having those types of education and resources. One front door, I've mentioned this already, but I just want to hit home the idea of obsessing over who your customer is, making it easy. They know where to go, they know which office, they know who to contact. Don't underestimate the power of that for your university. Some of you might have heard of the idea of star commercializers. Star commercializers are those those of us at universities are lucky to have these folks. These are the folks that time and time again come up with the great commercializable inventions. They're very savvy about speaking to the investment community, the corporate community. That type of flywheel can help others get involved and you can really make a name for yourself. It's a handful of our inventors here that make up the bulk of the licensing revenue. And so just make sure that you're aware of that, and you can even be helpful. Sometimes we're helpful in recruiting those types of folks. So feel free to raise your hand when the vice provost for research or department chair says, hey, I think I have this person who's interested in entrepreneurship. We often will help with those visits and the recruiting. Asking the business question is really important. Again, those of you steeped in university culture know that the way you are rewarded in university life is to write that game-changing paper, which is often a very narrow aspect of some particular technology. So helping, I just had a great conversation yesterday with someone in our physics department, for example, who's doing some game-changing work in all sorts of materials. And so I kept asking the question, okay, great. So this works out. What does that mean? Who could we sell this to? Who will be the customer? So just making sure that when you have meetings to talk about patents, inventions, and otherwise, that you're asking those questions. And I have a little cheat sheet in a minute that you're happy to copy of how we ask those questions. And then finally, really focusing on the ecosystem, knowing who else is in town that cares about this, that wants to help. You'd be surprised, folks that have made money as entrepreneurs, folks that are donors and grateful patients and others. They really want to help, and we've been able to tap into our local network. I already talked about a bit about Star Commercializers, but there is a great paper that written by a Wharton researcher in 2020 that talks about this if you need any additional fuel at your institution. This actually came from the tech transfer team, and I really like to use it because it talks about the types of faculty who do well, that we work with well, that seem to have success. It is the Venn diagram of these three things, when not only is the technology great and there is a business opportunity, but that faculty member and the team that they help to nurture are really able to execute and bring that forward. We all know that faculty have many, many demands on their time. Those that are willing to spend the time focused on this are the ones that do succeed. So this is something that is available on our website. You're welcome to screenshot it, steal it, take it from our website, anything you do. But this is, and again, particularly most relevant to the life sciences, but this is one of the rubrics we use when speaking to innovators about their invention, and really going to the heart of what's the problem, who's going to pay for this. It's very interesting. The venture community likes often to hear how much funding has gone in to date. It is a way to signaling to them that this has been somewhat de-risked. And so if you can get your hands on that information from grants, oh yeah, 6 million's already gone into this, or 20 million's already gone into this, that can often be a very effective hook for the venture community. So what makes a healthy startup ecosystem? I had a once in a lifetime opportunity last year to take a trip with my family to East Africa. And I was really struck by the fact that that is one of the most true and beautiful ecosystems in the world. And none of these creatures, plants, animals, nothing can survive on its own. This is actually a picture of a particular type of bird that follows the rhino around, because when the rhinos stop, a certain type of bug pops up from the dirt that the birds can eat. So it's this beautiful symbiotic relationship. None of us can do this alone. There is no way a tech transfer on its own will have the same level of a success as those that also are able to have space, access to capital, working with, for example, our state and local affairs team, attracting different types of talent. So just know that that really wrapping your arms around this and trying to have all the pillars of a great ecosystem is what makes this work. And this is hard. This is really hard. This takes long-term relationship building and identifying the folks that are the really willing to help. So that is the official end of my prepared remarks. And I would be, for my friends at the National Academy, I would be delighted to take any questions that you have.
Thank you, Christy. I'm going to open it up for questions. You can use the chat feature for any of the participants on the webinar, but I do have a few questions that came through email when we were promoting the webinar. So if you don't mind, you've talked about the journey, you definitely highlighted the numbers and the impact, but could you share with the audience what the culture was like when you started 12 years ago and how that's changed, particularly with faculty as it relates to recognition and invention?
Absolutely. And I think it's interesting. When I took this role, I think, by the way, someone asked to share the innovation. That's the innovation report. If people want to see that 2014 report, that should be the proper link. Hopefully someone can access that. I think this question, Jamie, was the one I got most often before I started. And, it's going to be an uphill battle. That's not necessarily Hopkins is the Hopkins way. Hopkins is known for being research for research's sake. One of the most valuable inventions in biotech of all time was restriction enzymes, invented here in the 1970s. And we very deliberately did not patent that. We did not start companies out of that. The thought at the time was we need just make it accessible for the world. That is the right thing. And so, I was coming into an environment where I had some trepidation around what that might mean. And yet I would say that it was so immediate that there was pent up demand from faculty and students to have access to these types of resources that the friction that we see is more in some of the policies and things that can make things easier. But as far as faculty and leadership, they were really all in from the beginning. And I think ultimately it's because you can trace a direct line from the lab to impact when you talk about products. And so I just don't think the resistance was there, and which was great for us.
So if not with the faculty, surely there were some challenges, some points of resistance along the way. Could you highlight any of those for us, really with an eye on helping people be aware and maybe prepare to handle that before it becomes an issue?
Yeah, absolutely. Look, this was not a straight line. It's a very Sisyphean task in terms of you think you've made progress, you're rolling the boulder up the hill, and then you wake up the next morning and it doesn't necessarily feel like you've made progress. And it takes a talented team. It takes a culture that is supportive, from leadership to department chairs to to faculty in the lab. So there's nothing about it that's that easy, but I think there are a few secret weapons. And one of those is just a lot of listening and customer discovery and making sure you understand where faculty are and what they need. I think results speak volumes. So getting a couple wins on the board and being able to talk about those, I think that's just a really big deal. But ultimately, when I have these conversations, when our team goes out and speaks directly to the labs, to faculty, to others, and we try as much as we can to get invited to lab meetings, department meetings, grand round, anything we can do to get the word out about our services, we really lead with impact. So as opposed to leading with money, or this is the patent, or this is our process, or report an invention, or all the mechanics of this, we try to say, okay, so at the end of the day, what are you trying to do? Oh, you're trying to cure pancreatic cancer, or identify pancreatic cancer, or provide a vaccine for pancreatic cancer. Great, we can help you do that. Let's talk about what it would take to do that.
Fantastic. We had a question come in from the participants, and they're interested in the student activity. They're interested beyond the students just working in the labs, how the mentoring happens at your university.
Okay, and by the way, I see, Jamie, that I put the chat. I don't know if it went to everybody. So anyway, I don't know if there's a way to get the link out to everybody. But sorry, is this the first question that's up on the board?
It is. It is.
Yes, I would say thank you, Dawn, for the question. With our students, what we've tried to do is we don't get necessarily between the PI and the students themselves. We try to win them both over to some degree. But what we do try to provide is a space for students who are interested in taking whatever they're doing in their lab. Again, this is particular for PhD students. And if they want to try to take the next step, we try to provide all sorts of support to do that. We have some presidential venture fellows. We have summer fellows where folks can stay around and try to build their company during the summer. We have semester-long acceleration programs. I personally started 5 years ago teaching a graduate level course, which is primarily PhD and master students interested in that level of translation. So, I would say that we don't necessarily get involved in the dynamics between the PI and the students, but we do really try to provide that open door to PhD students in any way that we can.
Perfect. And I know you can see the questions, but I'll phrase
Sure.
it for you.
Great.
The
Thank
question
you.
is the question is regarding licensing technology. Do you have defining criteria where you consider licensing versus starting a new company?
So, not necessarily. I mean, honestly, it often will depends on who's showing up at the door. If we have a case where there are existing companies interested, they have resources, our faculty wants to work with them, and we think we can get a license done, we do that. I say the golden rule that we have followed probably 90-something% of the time is, what does the faculty member want? What does the inventor want? Because we don't generally advise or think it's a good idea to force something where the inventor is not happy. We want the inventor to stay engaged. We want the inventor. So if the inventor says, I don't care if industry is interested, I want to start my own company, I've got a great business person lined up, show me how to talk to the venture community, and we agree that this could be a great startup, then we're certainly willing to help them. There would be other times where a faculty member says, I don't have time to do all that startup stuff. Like, can you just help me? And so it's very obvious that a startup probably won't work as well. So I think it just really comes back so much of the time to the faculty member.
So this one door philosophy and approach that you touched on during the presentation, there's some question around that. If you could unpack that a little
One
bit
door.
more, what does that mean? Yeah.
Yeah. So it's not necessarily about a physical space, although we do have a physical hub here. I'm sitting just north of Johns Hopkins Hospital, our flagship hospital in Baltimore. And we do have an office where we come together, where the folks that are at the schools of medicine, public health, and nursing can all walk from here. And then some of our folks spend time. We have another campus where most of our undergrads are, and a couple of our other schools. So we do have a physical presence, but what I really mean by that, the one door idea, is mostly about the bureaucracy of your own university. Okay. And really understanding that there are very well-meaning folks that have other jobs that may overlap with yours. And so make sure that you understand and embrace and figure out who's doing what. But we have found that it is unhelpful for there to be duplicative offices. Like, for example, if each school had its own tech transfer office, or if each school had its own business development function, or if each school had its own startup hub, that is not as helpful, because the reason that the reason this light bulb clicked for me is there was a venture firm that came down right when I started, and they were engaged with some folks in the engineering school, and they sat down, and there were a couple of other schools involved, but they sat down, and at the end of the day they said, well, why didn't we get to see anything from the medical school? And it clicked to me that when they come, they're not necessarily thinking in the same silos that we inside the universities think. When a venture investor comes, they just want to see the best of Johns Hopkins. They don't care if it's from our Peabody School of Music. It could be someone figured out how to tune a guitar better than anybody else. Or maybe it's at our School of Education where someone figured out software that helps kids learn better, whatever it is. They just want to see the best of Johns Hopkins. They do not want to be caught up in internecine warfare between who's doing what at a school versus who's doing something else. And so the front door concept is really about galvanizing the outside community so that they can come to Johns Hopkins instead of having to navigate each and every different function within the university.
So following up to that, you mentioned that the door is not just for external relationships, although you walked through that now, but the question is, what support and resources do you provide for faculty?
Yes, and that is wide ranging. So we were lucky to raise some philanthropy for various types of early translational funding. So as you all know, much of the government funding ends at a point where you need to start thinking about the business and prototyping and user interface testing and business planning, all the things that happen. So we were able to raise some funds, and so we have translational funds that we provide. We teach various types of courses to our innovators. Some of that is for folks that are starting a company and bound to start a company, and what does that look like? What's a cap table? Why is that important? What do the investors want? Why do they care about valuation? What's the regulatory path? All the things that may go along with that. We have a dedicated team that calls on the venture investing community, and we get our mostly PIs, but students ready for those conversations, right? We don't want to send just connect folks to venture investors when that idea or that pitch isn't ready. And so we spend a heavy amount of time getting our innovators ready for those conversations and then warming up the relationships on the other side. So that's just a few examples. I mentioned our venture mentoring program. We actually licensed recently from MIT, where it helps put clusters of experts around some of the best ideas to try to move those forward. So look, we've tried a lot of things. Again, not everything's worked, not everything's perfect. We've tried stuff, we pulled back, we try something else. But really I think it's about taking best practices, both on what you figured out and what others in the country have figured out. And again, hopefully this talk today will help demystify some of the things we've tried.
I believe it will. There was a question that I think is linked to this, and I'm going to make an assumption that you did do this, but it's around customer discovery, whether that's the external community or the faculty in-house. Did you go through a customer discovery process? And if so, do you do that on a regular basis to have that modify or shape resources and support that is provided on both sides?
Yes, and yes. There was kind of my own initial personal customer discovery. I didn't know the word for it then, but when I started this work in 2010 to 2013, when I was an entrepreneur, I met with about 150 different faculty and innovators here. Again, I wasn't an employee. I was just really interested. I was trying to find a great idea to invest in, honestly. And so that kind of led me down to say, oh, wait, here's some barriers or here's some opportunities. Then when we did the committee report, that was an 8-month process where we talked to hundreds of faculty and students at Johns Hopkins and dozens of outside folks. And so we gathered all of that and that was town halls, that was one-on-ones, that was lunch sessions. You know, we did everything we could to gather as much information as possible. So that was the bones of the strategy session. We set that up. And then the final thing is, with every day that goes by, we really try to hold a mirror up to ourselves and be critical. And some of the best feedback we get is when someone complains or is unhappy. Often I will personally just pick up the phone and say, what's going on? How can I help you? And I think that level of responsiveness and that level of trying to understand, it doesn't mean that we can solve every problem. And we're obviously at a huge university where there are lots of different office. We're not the grant office. We're not the conflict of interest office. We're not the uses of data office. There are many, many other folks that we work with, but we can often at least provide support, particularly as a first time or a young faculty is going through this.
So you touched on how you've evolved, but could you talk in broader terms around how you've seen tech transfer as an industry evolve over the last 12 years?
That's a great question. I think the nice thing is we are a highly collaborative industry, I find. I think there's a real willing of sharing best practices. If you think about that in the most simple terms, so I'm not a patent attorney, I'm not a PhD. I think about this from a business frame of mind, but there's nowhere else that you can go to get this particular technology that was developed at Johns Hopkins. So one of our most famous researchers is a man named Bert Vogelstein. He discovered the genetic basis for cancer. He started multiple companies. Well, guess what? You can't go to another, I'm not going to name all my other friends at other universities. You can't go to another university and get Bert Vogelstein technology. We're the only place that you can come for that. And ditto for any of our peers, any other university, you have what you have. And so sharing the infrastructure of how that is best relayed to the world, transferred to the world, shared with the world, I think only brings great upside. So I spend a lot of time with my colleagues at peer institutions. A lot of our team goes to various conferences where they can get to know others and understand best practices. We have all sorts of acceleration programs national acceleration programs we've looked at and partnered with. So we're always game for both sharing and learning.
All right, now we're going to go a little more specific. There's a question regarding collaboration with big pharmaceutical companies, and what they're really looking for is, as it relates to large state or to the late stage or mature products, is there a ideal collaboration model or scenario that you look for?
Look, most of our work here is with very early stage, preclinical. And so the question is more on late stage or mature products. I mean, I think the best way, and it's not my office, but I see the value in it. I think the best way that a place like ours, an academic medical center, can support that is be very efficient on commercial clinical trials and try to get those up and running and try to help answer the questions that the industry partner is trying to answer. The vast majority of the work that our group does, that we're responsible for, is really around that early discovery to try to get towards an IND.
All right, well, there are a few people that are sharing their contact information or their LinkedIn profiles, and they're wanting to know how to get in touch with you. So we'll share their contact information with you so that you can go from there. A few of them are saying we'd like to collaborate, and how do I get a chance to talk to you more? So
Okay.
we'll share
Just to be
that.
clear, because we first of all, we do not have a venture fund despite our name. So we do not invest in other companies. Just wanted people to be aware of that. The second thing is we get nearly 500 reports of invention per year. We're one of the busiest offices in the world. I think MIT is always number one in sort of 600 to 700, and we're usually in the 400 to 500 range. We have way more innovations and technologies that we can possibly handle, even with a very large team here. So unless you're a student here or your invention arose from here, if it's a Hopkins IP, then we just don't have the bandwidth to work with you. So, bless you, go in peace, but we're probably not going to be able to help you unless you're a Hopkins faculty or student.
Well, that may make the inquiries reduce moving forward, but I still think there's a handful of folks that would like to just hear more directly from you. So we'll share that information with you. So I know there's more questions coming in, but I'm sure everyone's curious about what's next. So you talked about what's happened over the last 12 years. What do you see happening over the next 10 years in tech transfer, but specifically for your office?
Sure. Well, we're seeing that more and more report, and I'm sure this is true for many of you, we're seeing more and more reports of invention are actually from or relate to software. And software is tricky. It's not the same as patenting a compound and a drug and having that deliver royalties for the life of the patent or the life of the drug. It's a very different animal. Our faculty are often focused, for example, on open source, and let's just get the software out there, and how can we make this available? It's also very hard to patent specific code because, of course, it's always evolving. That doesn't stop, by the way, big tech from patenting hundreds and hundreds of things a year related to software. But nevertheless, I think really cracking the code on how we can be supportive in software without having like the seminal patent, because it's just unlikely for most cases that there's going to be kind of one single patent within software. So I think we're continuing to get our arms around what does the intellectual property landscape look like for us to do that in the most productive and efficient way? How can we support our faculty? What does it look like to help someone start a software company? It's very different than helping them start a biotech company. That is of increasing importance here at Johns Hopkins because we are investing a tremendous amount of resources in a new Institute for Data Science and AI. In fact, it's called our DSAI Institute. We're hiring, the numbers are staggering. We are hiring 110 new faculty. That will bring with it hundreds and hundreds of new graduate students. And many of the faculty that we hire, we anticipate will be very interested in software companies, software products, etc. So I think we are really just trying to get our arms around how we can be most supportive.
So I'm going to give you a chance to make closing comments, but I'm hoping when you do that you can think back to 12 years ago and give some either the if there was a catalyst moment or a breakthrough opportunity. Folks now I think are excited about where you are and you cast the vision of where you're going. But if they're not quite there yet, how do they start this journey?
Yes. Well, again, it's not for the faint of heart, right? So many tech transfer offices, when it comes to the money side, it's often kind of one big thing. You got to plant 1,000 flowers and you don't know which one's going to bloom. Where those of us in this world, we know this. So I think having the patience to see it through, having long-term buy-in from leadership is really critical. I think having highly technical folks and storytellers is important. And I think just being really obsessed with who your customer is and how you can help them. I've told this story to a couple of friends recently, but I have a son who I needed to get some information from his allergist to his primary care doctor. And so I emailed well, first I called and they said, no, you have to send an email. Okay, so I sent an email. Can I please get the records for my son from the allergist? So, you know, he has an appointment. He's home from college for the brief window. I need the whatever. And I gave them a couple of weeks. No response to the email, I would call, oh, they'll answer the email. So finally I just said, in the email, I've got to have his appointment is in 2 days. I need the forms from the allergist. And the response I got on the email was, we legally have 21 days to get back to you. We will get back to you at day 21. So, that it's the mentality of not understanding your customer, not understanding what's helping, instead of saying, oh, of course, when's his appointment? I'll make sure that I have it to you, a day in advance. Like, there's just a way to be service-minded. And I think if you are in this business and you are not service-minded, you are in the wrong business. Get out of this business. So, understand your customer, be responsive. We can't be all things to all people, but just really trying to listen and understand and provide what you can provide. I think that's the most important thing.
I would agree. And I think you had a rule, and was it within a week that you respond to folks within
Yeah,
your...
it's 222. It's 2 days to let them know we got your invention. It's 2 weeks that we'll meet with you within those 2 weeks and hear more about your invention and help talk it through. And then within 2 months, we'll let you know. And sometimes, we have to say no a lot. We only patent a third of what we get, right? So 2/3 of the time, we have to very gently, it's a really hard job that our intellectual property managers have. They have to say no a lot. But doing that with grace and kindness and, hey, if we only had this data, or this isn't really a product, like you just have to do that. But it's the clarity to say, like, we're going to give you a yes or no answer, instead of just something falling in a black hole and no one knows, like, did they even get my report of invention? That has made a big difference.
Well, clearly your customer service culture goes beyond just serving your inventors and the way in which you interact with industry. And that this, I know, is not the first time that you've given this presentation. You alluded that many members of your team speak at conferences and events to share your journey and your best practices. So on behalf of the Academy, we applaud what you've done. We thank you for being a member of the Academy, and we appreciate you sharing everything with us today. Thank you, Christy.
I appreciate the opportunity. And again, our website is open to all. We have taken many things over time from others. And so folks should really feel free to use our content. We are, we're more than happy to share if it's helpful to others.
Excellent. Thank you again.